Hello everyone. Today I'd like to share with you our recent work on how learning under uncertainty changes during adolescence. First of all, what do I mean by learning under uncertainty? Let's say I need to travel from my house to school for work, and there are two possible routes, highway and local. 80% of the time, the highway is really backed up and the local route will be faster. However, 20% of the time, the highway has no traffic, and surely the highway will be faster. Therefore, the outcome to our decision is uncertain. Also notice that there is a learning aspect to it. When I first arrived in this town, I did not know these probabilities. I would have to learn about them through trial and error interaction with the environment. I'm sure you can easily come up with numerous other real-life examples like this. The point is that it's a really important ability for us to learn and adapt to this uncertain world. Put into a developmental context, it will be really interesting to ask, do kids, teens, and adults learn about uncertainty differently? And if so, how does it change during development? In order to address those questions, we used a butterfly task, which has been previously used to study learning under uncertainty. On each trial, the participant will see a butterfly and two flowers. What they need to do is to figure out which flower would the butterfly prefer through trial and error. Let's say they pick the white flower on the left. It will stay on the screen for 1 second, followed by a reward feedback of win or lose. Unknown to the subject, the butterfly does have a preferred flower. If the participant correctly picked the preferred flower, they will win 80% of the time. However, 20% of the time, the other flower would win. So this is just like the traffic example that I mentioned at the beginning. Also, there are 4 different butterflies. Each is shown 30 times in randomized order, resulting in a total of 120 trials. Each butterfly's preference stays the same throughout the experiment. For people who are more familiar with reinforcement learning terminologies, this is essentially a contextual two-armed bandit task. Because of the developmental nature of this study, we collected a large sample across a wide age range. Here on the x-axis is the age bins. You can see that our participants are fairly balanced across age and sex. In particular, we tried to sample heavily for subjects who are younger than 18. We have a total of 275 subjects for later analysis. What about their performance? Here on the x-axis, we break the total 120 trials into 4 30-trial blocks. On the y-axis, we calculated the probability that the participant correctly picked the preferred flower within each block. Darker color indicates older age group. You can see that participants' performance is improving over time, confirming the learning aspect of our task. Also, it seems that performance is improving with age. To get a more continuous look at the effective age, here in the scatter plot, the x-axis is age and the y-axis is the average performance across all 120 trials. The blue line is the best fitting quadratic regression line. You can see that performance increases during adolescence continuously and stabilizes during young adulthood. Doing the same thing for reaction time, we see that older participants are generally faster. This means that this is not a speed accuracy trade-off. Also, we didn't observe any sex differences. Now the important question is, what is actually driving this increase in performance? There are several possible hypotheses. It might be because older participants learn faster, or maybe they make less noisy and exploratory choices, or maybe they remember better and forget less. To test these hypotheses, we turn to reinforcement learning modeling, which is commonly used to model tasks with uncertainty. Let me briefly go through what the model looks like. For each butterfly B, we keep track of the value of each flower F1 and F2. We call these Q values. We use these Q values to decide on a particular flower F. This is implemented by passing the Q values through a softmax function parameterized by beta, which determines how noisy and exploratory the decision is. After choosing flower F, we receive reward feedback. The reward R is 1 if we win, or 0 if we lose. We then calculate the gap between our value estimate and the actual reward we received. We call this error signal RPE, which stands for reward prediction error. RPE is then used in the learning step to update our original value estimate by adding alpha times RPE. Here, alpha is the learning rate parameter, which characterizes how fast participants adapt in our task. There are two free parameters in this model, so for a lack of better naming, we call this model the alpha-beta model. We also tried other models. For example, instead of using only one learning rate alpha, we used two different learning rates, alpha plus and alpha minus, the positive and negative RPEs respectively. We call this the alpha plus, alpha minus beta model. We also tried adding a decay parameter f that decays the Q values towards baseline at the end of each trial, simulating a forgetting process. We call this model the alpha plus, alpha minus beta f model. To fit these models that I just described, we used hierarchical Bayesian model fitting. Hierarchical Bayes jointly fits all participants at the same time, and it has been shown that the parameter estimates are more robust than fitting participants independently. Take the alpha-beta model as an example. We assume that individual participants' parameters are samples from a group-level distribution. Therefore, we first sample the population mean and standard deviation of alpha and beta. We sample them from uniform distributions as weakly informative priors. Then for each subject J, we sample individual learning rate alpha from a truncated normal distribution. This normal distribution is parameterized by group level mean mu alpha and standard deviation sigma alpha. We do the same thing with beta. Now we have alpha and beta for each subject, we can calculate the total likelihood. We can feed this likelihood to sampling-based methods such as Markov chain Monte Carlo to sample from the posterior of all group level and individual level parameters jointly. This provides the additional benefit that we can obtain the entire posterior instead of just point estimates. After fitting these models, we compare them using WAIC. Similar to AIC, WAIC is a scoring metric used for model comparison. But WAIC is a fully Bayesian version, which is invariant to reparameterization. It turns out that the alpha plus, alpha minus beta f model has the lowest WAIC, so it's our winning model. Now that we have our winning model, we can look at potential age effects on the model parameters. This will help us test our previous hypothesis about what is actually driving the increase in performance. Recall that we first sampled group level mean and standard deviation, and then individual learning rates from that. We can actually test the effect of age directly by adding a regression into the hierarchical model directly. Now, what do I mean by that? Instead of just mean and standard deviation, we sample 4 things. Apart from the standard deviation as before, we also sample an intercept term, B0 alpha, a linear coefficient, B1 alpha, and a quadratic coefficient, B2 alpha. And we basically substitute the mean by a quadratic regression expression, where we have the intercept plus the linear term times age plus this quadratic term times age squared. To test for linear and quadratic effects of age on the learning rate parameter, for example, we basically just need to look at the posterior distribution of the linear and quadratic coefficients and test them against 0. Here is the result for alpha plus. For visualization on the left is a scatter plot of age against alpha plus for each subject. On the right, we have the posterior distribution of the linear and quadratic coefficients. The gray area indicates the 95% confidence interval. As you can see, 0 is outside of the gray area, indicating that we have significant linear and quadratic effects of age on alpha plus. And you can see that on the left as well. Similar to alpha plus, we have significant linear and quadratic effects of age on alpha minus as well. But alpha minus is much smaller than alpha plus, which indicates that participants are generally learning much less from negative feedbacks. We also found significant linear and quadratic age effects on beta, where higher beta results in less noisy and exploratory choices. Finally, we did not find any age effects on the delay parameter f, as 0 lies within the gray area. Tying back to our previous hypothesis, it seems that the increase in performance with age is primarily driven by faster learning and less noisy and exploratory choices. And similar results have also been shown in other studies. That being said, the overall picture is actually more complicated than that. Recall that we found increase in performance in the butterfly task, which is stochastic and fixed associations throughout the experiment. However, on the same population of subjects, X-Teen 2020 observed a much more pronounced inverse U-shape for performance in the task that's stochastic and switching. This suggests that the age effect on performance can be task dependent. The story is further complicated by the fact that the relationship between model parameters and performance is complex and nonlinear. This figure from Wilson and Collins 2019 plots a nonlinear relationship between learning rate and performance for different beta values. In our study, the learning rate values are relatively small. Therefore, higher learning rate generally results in better performance. However, in Dividal 2016, which also used the butterfly task, the learning rate values for adults were much higher and actually resulted in worse performance compared to adolescents. This shows that even with the same experiment, the same trend in model parameters can result in opposite trends for performance. To briefly summarize, we found better performance with age, which was primarily driven by higher learning rates and lower exploration with age. We also replicated many previous results in terms of performance and age effects on model parameters. However, the story is complicated due to task dependency and nonlinear relationship between model parameters and performance. Finally, we also collected pubertal questionnaires and saliva samples. In the future, we plan to conduct more analysis with pubertal data and see if it can provide further insights apart from age. In the end, I would like to thank all the people who contributed to this project, NSF for grant support, and thanks for organizing this amazing conference. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out to me through email. Thanks for your attention.